This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.
Hello, and welcome back to another class on learning how to use the Greek New Testament. I hope you've been studying. I hope you've been working on your vocabulary cards and have been reading ahead and becoming more familiar with the Greek. It certainly will help you in your Bible study preparation and your sermon preparation. I've enjoyed the course so far, and I hope that you have as well. Today we're going to move on to another aspect of the Greek, and particularly the parts of speech. And today we're going to talk about nouns. And if you don't remember what a noun is, let's take a moment to refresh our memory on what a noun is. A noun, remember, is a word that names a person, a place, a thing, a quality, or an idea. And for example there, you can see that Jesus is a person, so technically, grammatically speaking, Jesus is a noun. Jerusalem is a noun, and because it's a place. Bible is a noun because it's a thing. Happiness is a noun because it's a quality, and liberalism is a noun because it's an idea. And so you can see by looking at that chart what we mean by a noun. And maybe if you'll just put it in your mind this way, a person, place, or thing, that will help you to remember what a noun is. Before we get into the particulars and the specifics about a noun and the grammar related to that, I want to share with you just how important it is to know something about nouns and to know a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I want you to turn in your Bibles to John chapter 1. I want us to take a passage there that we'll read in just a moment that has reference to a noun in its plural form. You remember in the Gospel according to John, how that John began that Gospel speaking about Jesus being the Word, and that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He goes on to speak about, John does, in relating to us about the greatness of Jesus and His eternality, that in Him was life, and that life was the light of men, and that if you continue reading on through the text, you'll notice when you get down to about verse 10 or 11, it says that He came into His own, and His own received Him not. As John the Baptizer began preaching and teaching and preparing the way for Jesus, and as Jesus then followed in His ministry with what John had done, some people rejected Jesus. When He came into His own received Him not. But now let's take a look at the verses that follow. John chapter 1, verses 12 through 13. Here it is in the New King James Version. But as many as received Him, to them He gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in His name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Now, the phrase in question, or the phrase that I want us to take a moment to look at, is that phrase, not of blood. Not of blood. What does that mean? What does not of blood have reference to? A lot of people have suggested that not of blood there may have reference to ancestral history. It may have reference to a number of things, and it may perhaps puzzles people. What does it mean to be born not of blood? Does it have something to do with the natural birth process? Let's notice, first of all, that that word blood is a noun. Now, we could know that from English, but if we looked at it in Greek, we would see that it was hematon, and we know that hematon is a noun because of its particular noun ending that we'll learn a little later on even today. But in Greek, hematon is not only a noun, but it is a plural noun. It's a plural noun. Well, in English, as you can see, blood is what we call a mass noun. In other words, mass nouns just have reference to the accumulation of some particular item. For example, sugar. We don't speak of several grains of sugar as being sugars. We just say that if all of the grains of sugar were on a table, we would say, look at the sugar, no matter how many there were. Even if there was just a little bit of it, how would you separate it out? So there are such things as mass nouns. And in English, we don't say bloods. Look at his bloods that or that spilled on the table or that came out of his body. We would just say, look at the blood that came out of his body. But in Greek, that word hematon is actually a plural genitive noun. All right? It actually then could possibly be thought of as bloods. So that indicates really something to us, that maybe it has something to do with family lineage. In other words, bloods being plural, that one does not become a child of God based upon their ancestral history. Not because of your mother and your father do you have the right to become a child of God, simply because of who they are. And yet that's exactly what some among the Jews thought, that they had the right to become children of God even in the kingdom just simply because of their ancestral history. Many didn't receive Jesus, but now John reminds us, and I want to read it to you again, John 1:12. But as many as received into them, he gave power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. So in other words, we can become a Christian not on the basis of what our mom and dads have done, not on the basis of our ancestral history, or because maybe our particular lineage, our family lineage, is tied into Judaism, but rather we have the right to become children of God based upon our faith in Christ Jesus when we are obedient to the gospel, that we can become children of God when we indeed accept this man Jesus as the Word. Well, that's just a sampling of the kinds of things that you can learn in the Greek New Testament by looking at those nouns and seeing whether or not they're singular or whether or not they're plural. We're going to learn today also something about how those nouns act or behave in a sentence, what function they have in a particular sentence. So let's turn our attention now to the distinctive features of a noun. First of all, let's notice that noun has case, and as we'll see in just a moment, it has gender and number. But look at case. Our choices under case will be nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and vocative. Now, if you don't understand what those mean at this point, don't worry about that. Let's just notice what other distinctive features it has. Just notice that it has case, and it also has gender, in that it can be either masculine, feminine, or neuter. So you can have case, it can have gender, and then also notice that a noun also, as its distinctive feature, can have number. That is, it can either be singular or plural. And then one other fine point that we might make here is that not only do nouns have case, gender, and number, but notice also in Greek that we can refer to them as being a part of a particular declension, and for now we'll just let that be that it has reference to grouping, and it will either be first, second, or third declension. All right, well, let's go back through those and talk about them in a little bit more detail so that we can have a better understanding of the basic properties of a noun. What are the distinctive features of a noun? Okay, well, let's start first of all with a case. When we talk about case has to do with the function of the noun. And you might underline that word as you're taking notes and realize that it has function. Case has to do with the function of the noun as it relates to the verb or to other parts of the sentence. And that's in the book Essentials of New Testament Greek by Ray Summers. And so a noun like men could be the subject in one sentence, but it might be the indirect object or the direct object in another sentence. So realize that a noun can function in different ways in the sentence. It might be the subject of one sentence, okay? It might be the direct object or the indirect object of another sentence, and we'll talk more about what that means a little later on. But just for now, know that case has reference to how a noun is functioning in a sentence. All right, let's take a look at this sentence here. Paul sent the churches a letter. Notice that there is more than one noun in the sentence. Okay? Paul is a noun, and then sent is our verb. Churches is a noun, it's a thing. And a letter is a noun, it's a thing. Okay? So we've got three nouns in that sentence. We can know this, or that how each one is functioning in the sentence in English by word order. Paul is our noun, and I know that that's the subject of our sentence. Well, we can know this, as I said, by word order or by knowing our other parts of speech. And word order is absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical in English. Okay? Word order is absolutely critical in English. For example, by rearranging the exact same words from the previous sentence, okay, we can come up with an entirely different meaning. So if you take a look at that sentence there, the churches sent Paul a letter, you have all the same words that we had in the previous sentence. But now the words are functioning a little bit differently. Paul is no longer the subject of our sentence, is he? The churches is the subject of our sentence. And Paul then is acting as an indirect object in that sentence, and the letter is acting as the direct object. And so by just taking a look at those two sentences there, we've learned a little bit about the fact that a noun can function in a lot of different ways. Now, the usual word order in English, is as follows. Let's take a look at it now on the screen. It's subject first, followed by the verb, and then typically you'll have the indirect object, followed then by the direct object. So in English, we can determine what the subject is, or what a noun is doing in a sentence, by the word order. And typically you will see a noun that's the subject of your sentence followed by the verb. Now, it isn't always the case, and we'll perhaps see examples of that as we go along in this course, and you may run across those on your own. But typically, if you'll think of it as subject first and then the verb, you'll pretty well have the subject of your sentence in most cases in reading through the English text. All right. Well, let's take a look at this chart and see how then it's all laid out. Paul is our subject, plus sent is our verb, plus the churches is the indirect object, and letters then is the direct object. Now, in the other sentence, churches is our subject, and sent is the verb, and Paul is the indirect object. And again, we know that because of the word order, Now, again, in English, word order is critical. But in Greek, word order is not nearly as important for determining the subject of your sentence as it is in English. Now, word order will be important for emphasis' sake. And sometimes there are words that are tied together, and we'll talk about that as we go through this course. But for now, all I want you to know is this, that in Greek, word order isn't nearly as essential for determining the subject of our sentence. How then do we determine the subject of our sentence? How then do we determine the indirect object or the object, or when something's in the genitive case? Well, we're going to know it by its ending. Well, let's take a look at some examples that I have here on the board and see what we mean by this. Now, if you'll take a look over here at our board, you'll notice that I have 4 English sentences, the ones that were utilized in your book, in your textbook. And you'll notice that the first one here, men see apostles, the wisdom of men, he gave gifts to men, and apostles see men. Now what I want you to notice is that our word men here, which is our noun, is the example that we're going to be following here through this session, or through this particular example, is in different locations in our sentence. Okay? Notice here it precedes our verb. Here's our noun, men see apostles. And I know in English that this is my noun, okay, that is the subject of the sentence because of the word order. These apostles are what's being seen, and our direct object is going to follow most oftentimes then our verb. Okay, in this sentence, wisdom is my subject, okay, and of men is functioning in a different way. Here it's functioning in a possessive sense. Okay, which we would refer to as the genitive in Greek. Here, he gave gifts to men. Okay, he is our subject. See, it precedes our verb here. All right, gave gifts. Gifts is acting then as the direct object, and to men is the indirect object in this particular sense. And sometimes these direct objects and indirect objects will be switched in English a little bit, but nevertheless, right here, to men is acting as our indirect object, okay? And we could very well say to this as well that he gave gifts, or he gave men, that is, he gave to men gifts. We could actually even say it that way. He gave to men gifts. Well, at any rate, men is acting then as our indirect object. In this sentence, men is acting as the direct object. All right? In other words, they are the ones that are being seen. Apostles are the subject of our sentence here, precedes our verb, and then men is the direct object. Now, something else I want you to notice that I think is very, very important, okay? As you think about what a noun does in a sentence, in English, we're going to notice that that noun, even though it functions in different ways in the sentence, does not change its form. It does not change its form. That's important in English. Take a look, see? Men, if it's the subject, stays as men. It doesn't change its form. It's spelled exactly the same way. The same thing over here. When it's acting in a different way, it's still men. When it's acting in this sentence then as the indirect object, it's still men. When we act in this sentence as the direct object here, it's still men. It's spelled exactly the same way. In Greek, though, things are going to be a little bit different. It's going to change its ending. Its ending is going to change, and it's not necessarily all that important where it is in the sentence for determining how it's functioning in the sentence. The ending is going to tell us everything we need to know. So let's take a look at some Greek sentences now. We'll start up here on the first one, which is exactly this sentence that we were just talking about a moment ago about men see apostles. Here is our verb, blepusi, and we'll remember this is third person plural, they see, they see. All right, we have to have agreement with our verb and our noun, and this is plural, so more than likely I'm going to have a plural noun, and sure enough I do. Here is my noun, anthropoi, for men. And I know that by the ending, and I'll point that out to you in just a moment. But notice, it doesn't precede the noun here. It doesn't precede the noun here at all, but rather, men is the subject, because I know that by my ending. It's going to agree with my verb, and so men see apostles. I know this is the direct object because of the ending, and we'll learn those endings in just a moment. But now notice the second sentence here, all right? The wisdom of men, the wisdom of men. Hey, Sophia anthropon. Hey, Sophia anthropon. Here is my word men here. And now notice the ending is a little different than it is here. Anthropon is in the genitive case. So I know that it's has reference to this right here, belonging to this, all right? In other words, what wisdom are we talking about? The wisdom that belongs to men, the wisdom of men. Edokin, anthropos, domata. Let's notice here in this sentence that anthropos, our word for men, all right, is in the middle of the sentence. And notice its ending is a little bit different than the other sentences that we looked at earlier, on and ois, okay? Edokin is our verb here, and it means he gave. He gave. Now, for right now, you'll just have to accept my word on this that we don't have a nominative case ending anywhere in this sentence. So in that case, then the verb or the noun ending, okay, the personal pronoun ending in the verb becomes the subject of the sentence, which only makes sense because it has to agree with the verb, a noun. If it was a noun, the nominative case a little later on in the sentence, it'd have to agree. But since we don't have a nominative case noun, this becomes the subject of our sentence. Edokin, he gave. All right, well, what did he give? What did he give? Did he give men? No, in English we might think that, because in English word order is critical. But it can't be that he gave men gifts, but rather this has to be who received the gift, okay, because it is in the indirect object, all right? So he gave, and what he gave was gifts, and he gave them to men, okay? So he didn't give men to gifts, but rather he gave gifts to men. And I can know that again by our ending. See how that word order here then is not the most important thing in determining the function of a noun in a particular sentence. Now let's go to the fourth sentence. Anthropous, blepusi, apostoloi. Apostoloi. Well, if you'll remember from earlier lessons, this is your verb. It has a verb ending, usi, usi. They see, they see. Well, I know right away that I'm going to have a plural noun that's the subject of my sentence, and there it is, apostles, apostles, okay? So that's the subject of my sentence. But what the apostles are seeing is way down here, is way down here. You see how that all these words can be mixed up, but that doesn't matter, that I can still know what the subject is. I can know what the direct object is, the indirect object, what's in the genitive case by the ending. So that anthropos here then is my direct object, okay? It's what's being seen. An apostle or the apostles or apostles see men, okay? Now, let's see it all together here. If we see all of these words in their different forms now, if we take a look at just the word men, notice anthropoi, notice anthropon, notice anthropois, notice anthropous, okay? Whereas in English, in the sentence we looked at earlier, men was men, was men, was men, was men. In all of the sentences, it did not change its form, even though its function had changed in the sentence. In English, the word men did not change its form, even though its function had changed in the sentence. But in Greek, when a noun changes its function, we will know that by its ending. So that if you'll notice here, oi is a different ending, on is a different ending, ois is a different ending, and us is a different ending. And yet our stems, the stem of this word stays the same in every instance or every occurrence here. It's still the word men. This means men, this means men, this means men, this means men, but now it's functioning a little different in the sentence because of the ending. So you can see then how important it is to learn the endings in Greek. All right, what I want us to do now is to spend a little time talking about the different cases. What are the different cases? Let's learn more about those cases, and we're going to pull them up on your screen now one by one. Let's take a look at the first case. The first case is the nominative case, the nominative case. And when we talk about the nominative case, we're talking about the subject of the sentence, nominative case, and it actually comes from a Greek word or from a Latin term that has reference to naming something. So nominative case indicates the subject of the sentence, and then also it's the naming case. It's the naming case. So if you find a noun in the nominative case, it has a nominative ending, and it's the subject of the sentence. It's the subject of the sentence. For example, John saw Jesus coming to him. In Greek, John would be in the nominative case. It would have a nominative case ending, okay? All right, let's take a look at the board, for example, at what I'm talking about here. If, for example, you found this ending, okay, or you found this ending, we would know that it was nominative case just by that ending attached to a word. And we saw that in an earlier example. Okay, so that's the nominative case. Let's take a look at the next case, the genitive case. Now, the genitive case is the case which describes, It specifies or qualifies, and it's often thought of as the case of possession. In fact, you might underline that in your notes. That's sort of the key word for the genitive case. Even though it does a whole lot of other things, possession is the key idea. It's often translated with the use of the word of. So, in other words, before I talk about the example, anytime you see a word in the genitive case, okay, you'll find a noun, it'll be in the genitive case, you'll have to supply that preposition of, it'll accompany that word to help translate that into English. And that'll become a little clearer as we work through some of the sentences in a little bit or later on in this lesson. Now, so the genitive does other things that we'll learn in further studies in this series of lessons. But for now, just think of it as the case of possession. And let's take a look at the example of which we alluded to just a moment ago. All right, and there at the bottom of your screen, the sentence, the disciples of John fasted. All right, if you were reading that in Greek and you came across the word John, John would have a genitive case ending, and you would know then that it was to be translated with the word of in that instance. If looking at the context, you could determine that. So that the disciples of John fasted. John would be in the genitive case, okay, and being referring to, whose disciples are we talking about? The disciples that belong to John. John is showing possession. They are his disciples, So John would be in the genitive case. All right, let's take a look at the next case. We have nominative, genitive, and then now dative case. Dative case is the case which points out the person to or for whom something is done. Okay? It is most often associated with the indirect object. So if we're reading a particular Greek sentence and we see that sentence has a noun in it with an indirect object ending or a dative case ending, we know that then that ought to be translated in its dative case form as the indirect object. Now there are again some other uses, and we'll talk more about this a little later on in some of the different usages, different ways that these cases can be used. But for now, just think of the dative case as being the case of the indirect object, often translated with the use of to or for. Often translated with the use of to or for. So sometimes you'll use the word for that will precede the actual noun that you're translating. Sometimes you'll use that word to precede the noun that you're translating, okay? It's just sort of to help it come across into English. Now here's an example of what we're talking about. The very last point there on your screen. Jesus was speaking words of truth to the crowd. All right? If you found that word crowd in Greek, you would notice that it would have a dative case ending, and you would use the word to help translate it. Now that word the is an article, and we'll talk more about that a little later on, what the means or what it has reference to, and when you would translate it and when you would not translate it and so forth. But for now, just think about putting that word to before a word that you translate. All right, let's take a look now at this fourth case. We've talked about the nominative, the genitive, the dative, and now the accusative. Notice that the accusative case receives, or in other words, when a noun is in the accusative case, it is said to receive the action of the verb or that which is directly affected by the action of the verb. It's known as the direct object, and sometimes grammarians will just say DO for direct object. It is relative to the verb. Now, relative to the verb, it answers the question of what? It answers the question of what? So let's notice the next point about it is that it is known as not only the direct object, not only answers the question of what, but the example that we have here is Jesus was speaking words of truth to the crowd. Notice the word words. Words in Greek would be in the accusative case, and we would know that it was in the accusative case by its ending. So that if you applied what we're saying here now to this sentence of asking the question what, Jesus is our noun, he's the subject of our sentence. Okay, was is our verb. Jesus was speaking. Actually, we have a verb phrase there, was speaking, okay, is our verb, and that would be one word in Greek. All right, well, what was he speaking? What was he speaking? He was speaking words, and then of truth would be in the genitive case, okay, and to the crowd would be the indirect object. Crowd would be the indirect object. So there you have sort of it all put together. Let's look at it again now. Jesus, the subject, was speaking is our verb phrase, okay, and what is he speaking? Words. Words is in the accusative case, also known as the direct object. Of truth would be in the genitive case in Greek, okay. So words, truth is possessive, and then to the crowd is the indirect object, to the crowd. All right, so that's the accusative case. Okay, so in your mind, remember, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. All right, now, Greek has one more case, and even though it's not used all that often, I still want to make you aware of it. We're not always going to hold you accountable for learning the endings of this last case, but it is used sometimes, and it's known as the vocative case. The vocative case. It's not widely used. It's the case of direct address. The case of direct address. For example, Lord, have mercy on us. And as you can see in that sentence, we would be addressing the Lord, or one would be addressing the Lord. And as it would be written in the New Testament, in a gospel account, for example, Lord would be written, its ending would be a vocative case ending, and we know that the Lord was being addressed in that instance, that He wasn't necessarily the subject of the sentence, or having the nominative case ending, or that He wasn't the direct object or whatever, but Lord, have mercy on us. And that's the vocative, the case of direct address. Now, let me just say something here to you. Greek only has 5 case form endings, okay? 5 cases in Greek. Now, other languages like Latin have more cases than that. In fact, in some grammars, like Ray Summers' book on Essentials of New Testament Greek, you'll notice that he has several cases listed there. But if you go back and look at those cases that he has there and the several others, that the endings are going to be identical to the 5 that we mentioned here. So there are only 5 case form endings in Greek. However, those case endings perform a lot of different functions that we'll just have to learn about as we go along by the context, and that you'll be able to determine that by the context of the sentence and what words to use to translate that. But for now, just know that we're going to be concerned with the 5 case endings of Greek. So what we have said to this point is basically this, that nouns have various features. They have case, they have gender, and they have number. And we've just talked about what cases there are as far as the form endings in Greek. And now let's talk a little bit about gender. Let's talk about gender. Gender is sort of a method of classification. It's a method of classification. And when we speak about gender, we're also talking about there being different types of gender, and they can either be masculine, feminine, or neuter. Masculine, feminine, or neuter. Now, in English, nouns are classified on the basis of what we call natural gender. Natural gender. And by that I mean, if we speak about a man, for example, we would be speaking about the man being a masculine noun. A woman would be a feminine noun, and we would just follow on out through with other nouns. They have sort of natural gender, and then anything like a book, an inanimate object of sorts would be in the neuter gender. But it's not that way necessarily in Greek. Greek generally follows natural gender with living things, okay? Living things, qualities. Things, qualities, ideas, though, are not necessarily neuter in Greek, okay? And being able to recognize these genders is very important. So recognizing gender is important because it can determine a number of things with how a pronoun relates to a noun in a sentence, and we'll give some examples of that as we go along, but knowing who is this referring to. And in Greek we can be very precise because a pronoun will have to agree with its antecedent, its noun, both in gender, case, and number. They have to agree in gender. And so if you took, for example, the passage in Matthew chapter 1 that have reference to Mary being the mother of Jesus, of whom was born Christ. Whom, our relative pronoun there, is a feminine pronoun that ties us back into Mary, so that we know that Jesus was born of Mary, that his lineage came in the sense of that he was born not of Joseph, as it had been said in all of the other names mentioned in that text in Matthew chapter 1 in the genealogies there, that so-and-so was born of so-and-so, Abraham begot Isaac, and so forth. If you keep going down, you'll notice that Abraham begot Isaac. But then it's very careful in the Greek New Testament to say that Mary begot Jesus, and it says, of whom was born Christ. Well, the whom there is a feminine noun, making it absolutely certain that Jesus came from Mary, born of a virgin, that Joseph did not have anything to do with it directly, biologically speaking. So noticing some of those things about gender can be very, very important. All right, so nouns have case, nouns have gender, and then third, I want us to notice that nouns have number. Nouns have number. Nouns are said to have number, meaning that they are either singular or plural. For example, man is singular, men is therefore plural. And so they have case, they have gender, and they have number. And then something else I want you to be aware of is that nouns are a part of a declension. They don't necessarily have declension, but they're a part of a declension. And by declension, I simply mean a group of something. There are three groups of nouns. And in the next lesson, we're going to talk a little bit about those nouns and how we determine what declension that they're in. But declension is not going to change or have an effect on function of a noun in a sentence. It's just a way of how those nouns are grouped and that their endings are going to be a little bit different, and we'll learn those a little later on in the course. So let's learn now the case endings in Greek. Let's learn those case endings. Case endings of nouns of the second declension. And if you'll notice now on the board, what I have here is what we call a paradigm, okay? And from time to time, I'm going to ask you to memorize a particular paradigm. Now, if you look at this paradigm, it's laid out according to the cases that we've already talked about. And when we learn a particular paradigm, these will always be in the same order, okay? Nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and then our vocative here, all right? Notice also that basically this is divided into different columns here. You have this column here, which has reference to the singular endings. These are our plural endings, okay? And together, all of these in green here are the endings for the masculine and feminine nouns of the second declension. And by the way, I want to mention to you, I failed to mention this to you just a moment ago, and that is, we know a noun is either masculine or feminine according to the grammar books. Now, some of them will be very obvious, but when we look at a noun and we say, well, is that masculine or feminine? If you'll remember, I said in previous lessons that that little article out to the side, if it's an eta, will tell you that that noun is a feminine noun. If there's an omicron, that's telling you that it's a masculine noun. But in nouns of the second declension, in other words, all the nouns that are grouped together by their endings, all right, whether they're masculine or feminine, they're going to have these endings right here, okay? So that what you need to do in order to enjoy reading Greek and learning how those nouns function in the sentence, you need to commit to memory this paradigm. And it's fairly easy to commit to memory if you'll just do this and commit it to memory in this way. Os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. Now you'll notice that I did not include the vocative case here. In most instances, the vocative endings will be exactly as they are in the nominative, with the exception of the vocative singular for masculine and feminine nouns here. It's okay? You say, well, how do I know that if it's vocative or if it's nominative? The context of the sentence will tell you. It will be hard to translate it otherwise, okay? And we'll point out some other things like that where you have some endings that look a whole lot the same. But for now, what I want you to do, and when we work on this paradigm, is just memorize these first four cases. Remember, I said at the very outset of this course, I'm going to try to make it as easy for you as possible to eliminate as many extraneous things as possible so that we can get right into reading the Greek New Testament. Not that this isn't important, but I'm just saying right now I think it's just one more thing that you have to try to work on remembering that you really don't need to remember, because most of them are going to be the same anyway, and you'll know it by the context when you get there. So I want you at this time to say these along with me. I'm going to say them, then I want you to say them after me, and then I want you to commit them to memory. So here we go. Os, u, o, Now say them out loud. It's important to say it out loud. On. Oi. Own. Ois. Remember our diphthong? Oi. Ois. Another diphthong. Us. With a sigma. Us. So here's how you would remember it. Os, u, o, on. Oi, own, ois, u. Os, u, o, on. Oi, own, ois, u. And you can even have some fun with that. And by the way, just to give you a little break, I'm going to tell you a quick story. One time I was watching a television program, and they had a man that came on there. His name is Robert Tilton. And he came on and was claiming that he could speak in tongues. He was claiming he could speak in tongues. And so the one who was interviewing him asked him, well, could you give us an example of that? And he started saying, well, asu oan, oion osus, and oese amanetus, and oese amanet. And he was saying that, and everyone thought, wow, he's really speaking in tongues. And I got to listening to that, and you know what he was saying? He was quoting these endings in Greek. He wasn't speaking in an ecstatic utterance that some people claim today when they speak in tongues, but he was just reciting the endings of some Greek cases that he had learned in a class many years before. Well, my point is that you do need to commit these to memory, but remember they are Greek and they're intelligible and things that you can understand. All right, so here we go. Os, u, o, on. Oi, on, ois, us. Os, u, o, on. Oi, on, ois, us. Just say that over and over again. Os, u, o, on. Oi, on, ois, us. And if you'll get that in your head, in just that order, after a while you'll start to remember. Os is nominative case, and you can close your eyes and you can just see the paradigm in your head. Os is nominative, okay? U is genitive. O is dative. And then os, u, o, on is accusative, and you'll see it just in that way. And after a while, after reading through the sentences, you won't even stop to think about this paradigm. Every time you see a word ending in os, you'll think, that's the subject of my sentence. You won't even have to stop and think about it. All right, let's notice just a couple of things here, again, to call you to your attention, that this dative case ending is omega, and it has this little iota. It's called the iota subscript. Sub means under, script has reference to writing. You write it underneath. All right, so in other words, at one time, this iota, as you can see, was at the end, like it was here, but for some reason or another, and I like to say it this way so you can remember it, it maybe didn't want to be out here by itself. It got scared and ran underneath the omega. So it went under here. Well, that'll just help you remember. That little dative mark there will help you to remember, or that little iota subscript will help you to remember that that's dative case. It's dative case, and it's the indirect object of our sentence, okay? So we want to learn os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. Now, again, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to mark across here so that we won't worry about those vocative case endings at this point. And these are the noun endings now for the masculine and feminine. All right. Now, when we have a noun in this declension that is neuter, okay, it would oftentimes be translated as it. It's a thing in English, okay? When we come to a neuter noun, we're going to have to notice their endings are a little bit different, okay? But you won't have to relearn a whole new set, just a few things. So that on neuter nouns, when that noun is the subject of the sentence, it's going to have the on ending as opposed to, and I'm going to go back over here and look at this masculine and feminine, as opposed to an os ending. So if I have a noun that's a neuter noun, and I want to make that noun the subject of my sentence, it's going to have this ending and not that ending. And now, if this seems a little confusing, a little later on in the next lesson, when we learn about the articles that accompany these nouns, it'll bring it all together and it'll be a whole lot easier. So just stay with us right now and realize, hang in there, you can do it, and you'll be able to understand this. Just keep working with it, okay? But on ending for nominative, singular, neuter nouns. Now notice, when those neuter nouns function in the sentence as the genitive, showing possession, it's going to have the same ending as they did over here with the masculine and feminine nouns, okay? And notice my dative, same thing. O, okay? Now when I come to the accusative, on, okay, is the same as here. But it's a little different. It's the same over here as the accusative. Now one thing you're going to notice is that, well, how do I know if it is on nominative or on accusative? On nominative or non-accusative? You will learn that by the context of the sentence and by the article that accompanies it. And we'll see that a little later on again. That will become clearer to you. But for now, what I want you to memorize is this. On, on. And then is the plural ending for neuter nouns. Okay? Instead of oi, we have but then it's just like it is over here in the masculine and feminine nouns. On is genitive, ois is dative, and then we go back to as being accusative. So really all you're learning is this and this, adding it on to what we'd already learned. But I think it's easier if you go ahead and say on, on, ois, on, on, ois, okay, and learn it in just that way. So what I would work on doing is committing this to memory, this paradigm. In other words, being able to draw it out so that you know all of these are nominative case endings. If I see a noun with this ending on it, that it's going to be the subject of my sentence. Now in this case, it might be the accusative, but we'll talk about that later. If I see a noun with these endings on here, really just two of them, right? I know that that noun is functioning in the genitive case. It's probably showing possession in many instances. If I see a noun with any one of these endings across here, I know that noun is functioning as the indirect object in my sentence. If I see a noun with these endings here, I know that that noun is functioning as, in the accusative case, as the direct object of my sentence, the direct object of the verb. So what I want you to do is commit this paradigm to memory. Be able to study it, look at it, and then get out a sheet of paper, test yourself, and write them out. Write those endings out. Okay? Now, let's do one more thing. Let's show these endings attached to the ending of the stem of a word, some words that you're familiar with because you've been working on the vocabulary, and show how that word changes its form depending upon how it may be functioning in a sentence. So we're going to apply all these endings to a particular word. Let's take this masculine noun, apostolos. Let's notice apostolos, nominative case ending, os. Okay, and I've written them here in a different color for you so you can see them clearly. Apostolos, apostolou, apostolo, apostolon. If I saw apostolos in a Greek sentence, I'd say that's the subject of my sentence. That the apostle then, the apostle would be performing the action of the verb. Okay, now if I did apostolou, I would know that it would be in the genitive case, possession. Apostolo, dative case. Apostolon, accusative. All right, here they are in the plural. Apostoloi, apostolon, apostolus, apostolois, apostolus. Okay, so if I see apostoloi, I know that men then is the subject of my sentence, and the men would be performing the action of the verb. Okay, if I saw apostolus in a sentence, I would know that the men would be the direct object of the verb. So knowing those case endings are very important. Now let's talk about the neuter endings for the second declension. Notice our word teknon here, which means a child. Now see, again, we would think child might be following natural gender or whatever, but in Greek, a child is in the neuter, okay, and will have these neuter endings. So don't worry about why masculine, feminine, why neuter. Just sort of accept it right now that they're going to be classified by different genders, and because of that, we have to sort of know their endings to know how they're functioning in a sentence. But teknon then, all right, if I saw teknon, it would either be the subject of my sentence or it'd be the direct object. And context is going to tell you, and those articles are going to help you. So teknon, teknu, tekno, teknon, tekna, teknon, teknois, tekna. Okay? After a while, you'll just begin to see own. Oh, that's genitive. And you'll just automatically start translating that with of children. Okay, of children, or to and for children. Now, one other thing as we go back to this other chart that I want you to keep in mind now. Okay, as I look back up here on the board, something I want you to do at this point in your notes is to go back as you write out these paradigms for yourself, or even in your textbook. And this helped me to sort of, until I got it in my head a little better, to know that I could translate this with the word of. Translate a word in the dative case with the word to or for. And I would write that in before those, and that would help me to remember. When I have a genitive case noun, I'm going to use that word of to help translate it. When I have a dative case noun, I'm going to use the word to or for to help translate it. And you could write that all the way across if you wanted to. So this is an important paradigm. It's the paradigm of the second declension of nouns that have their stems that end in an omicron. And this is how they form their endings to show their function in the sentence. Okay, well that has to do with nouns and their noun endings. Now, what I want to talk a little bit about is articles. All right, so let's take a moment to talk about articles. Now, articles are very, very important in Greek. And when we talk about an article, we're talking about, for example, the word a, or an, or the. Okay, those are all examples of articles. Now notice next that an article is a noun marker or determiner. It's a noun marker. So if you'll see, notice in English, you're reading along in the sentence and you'll see the article, for example, the man, the apostle, the animal, the cat, the dog, the preacher, and whatever. You'll see that the is sort of, hey, so indicating to you and saying, what's going to follow is now as a noun. Okay. Sometimes, as you'll notice now, back on our screen, is that nouns, these little articles, are sometimes referred to as adjectives. All right, adjectives. And technically, that's what they are. That's why an article is not a separate part of speech. It indeed is an adjective. All right, the is the definite article. When we talk about a definite article, we talk about the definite article, we're talking about the word the. Okay, the word the. And it points to a specific thing. In other words, the man as opposed to a man. We're talking about the man, the preacher. Okay. Then notice that we have an indefinite article in English, and it's the word a or an. And we use a or an depending upon what noun follows. If we have a noun that begins with a vowel, like apple, then we're going to use the word an apple. That's how that's done. If you've ever thought, I don't know if you've ever thought much about that, but you don't say a apple, you say an apple, and you use an when it precedes a noun that begins with a vowel. And Greek does some similar things like that, as we will learn. All right, but for the moment, now getting back to our screen, notice that Greek, though, has no indefinite article. Greek has no indefinite article. All right, now let's take a look at these Greek sentences here on the board to illustrate what we're talking about. Notice in this first sentence, anthropos, blepe, apostolos, that anthropos is not preceded by any other letter or noun marker, an article of any sort. Well, so since Greek has no indefinite article, when we translate anthropos, the word for man, we have to supply that in English in order for it to make sense. So we would say a man, okay? A man, blepe, right? Third person singular, a man, he, she, or it. Well, he, because this is a masculine noun. A man is seeing an apostle. And again, no indefinite article in Greek. There's nothing that precedes it, so we're going to supply the word an in this case because it precedes a vowel, apostle. And on is by the way, our accusative case ending. The apostle is what's being seen. Remember, accusative case answers the question of what? An apostle is what's being seen. But here's the example. A man is seeing an apostle. Now notice in the second sentence, here we have an article. This, and we'll learn this in more detail in the next lesson, in the next session, that this means the. Okay? Now, in Greek, the changes its form a lot, whereas in English it's thee always, no matter what it's with, but the sometimes can look like this. So in this sentence, ha anthropos, we would translate this as the man. Here, anthropos was a man. Here, the man. Okay? The man is seeing the apostle. And so here we have our article, the apostle. So all that boils down to is this. Greek has no indefinite article, and you have to supply the a or the an when a noun is not preceded by a definite article like it is in this case. And some of that I think will become even clearer to you as we go along. So for now, let's just speak about the fact that articles are very important, that we're going to translate them when they're there, and there are times in English or in Greek when that definite article will be there and it won't be translated in English, but that's for another lesson and for another time. So what we want to do at this point now is begin to work on some exercises and translate some of the sentences that are found in your book. All right, now go ahead and take out your textbook, and what I want you to do is turn to page 31, and that's in chapter 4. And at the very back of chapter 4 on page 31, there are a list of sentences. And what I want you to do at this point is to work through some of these sentences before I work through them on the board. And so I want you to work the odd number of sentences at this point. Go through and work the odd numbered sentences, and then I want you to stop the video, and then we'll come back and we'll go through these together on the odd number of sentences, and you're going to end up doing the even numbered ones for your homework. But go ahead at this point and stop the video and work through those sentences. Okay, welcome back, and what I want you to do now that you've had an opportunity to work through those sentences is to go through them with you on the board. So let's take a look at these sentences now, and I want you to notice that we need to read them first of all, and read them out loud so that they're getting in our head. All right, graphe, doulos, naman. Okay, graphe, doulos, naman. All right, the first thing that I like to do when I work through a Greek sentence is to locate the verb. I want to locate that verb, first of all. And here it is, graphe, okay, because I know that I've got a verb ending. Remember, oese, amen ete, usen. And sometimes if you want to have a little sheet to the side with those endings on there to kind of help you as sort of a aid in your studying, that's okay if you do that. And you'll notice that this is third person singular, right? So it's either he, she, or it, okay, depending upon the subject of my sentence. Now, I'm going to look down through here now. I found my verb. He, she, or it writes or is writing, okay? Now, who is writing? I've got to have somebody doing the writing. And I look down through here and I find doulos, and I say, oh, there's my nominative case ending. Remember, os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. Os is nominative singular, and doulos is a slave. So I know a slave or a servant, sometimes we translate it, is the one that's doing the writing. My noun has to agree, my nominative case needs to agree with my verb. There's verb agreement so that I know that this is singular and this is going to be singular. So a slave is writing, okay? And I'm going to translate this verb, present, it's a present active indicative verb, all right? The tense is present tense, and we're going to have that person doing the writing. It's present time, but there's ongoing action. Imperfective action is the way that we want to translate those verbs. So a slave is writing, okay? What's being written? On is accusative case. That's an accusative case ending. Os, u, o, on. Os, u, o, on. On is accusative. All right? And so it, therefore, is my direct object. It's what's being written. Okay? It's the object of this verb right here. It's the object of that verb. Now, I'm going to go over to the side of the board here, and I'm going to write down for you some of those endings again. Os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. Okay? So there are those endings. Remember, this is nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. And there's my on ending right here that we were talking about with regard to naman. Now notice there is no definite article preceding this. All right, neither is there one preceding doulos. So we're going to say a slave or a servant is writing a law. A slave or a servant is writing a law is how that should be translated. Notice something else about this sentence that I think is very important. And that is, as we have mentioned, word order in Greek for determining the function of a noun is not important. It's the ending that is important. See, my noun or my subject here, this noun that's in the nominative case, which is telling me it's the subject of the sentence, is actually after my verb. I could have put it down here and it still wouldn't have mattered in this sentence, right? Because I know that this has to be the subject because of the ending. So, a slave is writing a law. Okay, let's take a look then at this next sentence. Luusen, adelphoi, doulos. All right, luusen, adelphoi, doulos. Okay. Now, as sort of an aid, what I want to do is go back over to the side of the board again, and I'm going to write down these verb endings as I mentioned them earlier. O, eis, a, amen, ete, usen. Okay, and sometimes we have the nu on there, the movable nu, remember? Okay, so I've taken a look at those, and I remember those are my present active indicative endings. And sure enough, here it is, third person singular, third person plural. Lu is my stem, usen is my ending. So they loose. Who's they? Who is they? Who are we talking about? Well, sometimes a sentence, or most of the time, a sentence will have a nominative case ending that tells you exactly who it is. On occasion, and we'll run into sentences like this, there won't be a nominative case ending in the sentence anywhere, and in that case then the pronoun inherent in the verb becomes the subject. But we have a subject here. They loose. Who is they? Is there anywhere in the sentence that tells me who they is? Sure. Nominative case ending. Now notice, we go back to our paradigm, and we're going to notice that that oi ending right there, all right, is nominative plural. Okay, nominative case telling me it's the subject of my sentence. Now look, go just back over here at our word. This is telling me it's the subject of our sentence. Okay, it can't be anything else because it has this oi ending. So brothers, because that's plural, brothers, okay, brothers are loosing. And then what are they loosing? Well, I have a direct object ending here, us, okay. All right, now take a look at our paradigm again. Us, if I go over here, accusative case ending, us. There it is. Accusative is the direct object. Accusative plural. So now I know that if I look back at my sentence, that slaves are the ones that are being loosed. In other words, I know by looking at the endings that the slaves aren't loosing the brothers, but rather I know that the brothers or brethren are loosing slaves. They're loosing slaves, okay? And in that instance, we don't have to insert a in there. It would be understood. Okay, let's take a look then at this third sentence. And I'm going to switch markers here just to give you a little variety, change things up a little bit to keep you all awake out there as we go through these sentences. All right, notice, here's our next sentence. Graphes, all right, graphes, lagus, apostolos. Okay, what do I want to do? I want to try to find that verb. I want to find the verb. And here it is. It has a verb ending, right? O, eis, a, amenete, usen. Eis is second person singular, so that means you in the singular. So you write. Now, what did we say? I want to try to find a nominative case ending. I look down here, I see a nominative case. No, that's accusative. Okay, no, that's dative. Wait a minute, Brother Moore. I don't see a nominative case ending anywhere. Remember what I told you a moment ago? When you don't have a nominative case ending anywhere in the sentence, then the ending of the verb, the pronoun inherent in that verb, then becomes the subject of the sentence. That's real important. A lot of students get tripped up on that. They say, wait a minute, where's my nominative case? It's not there anywhere. What's the subject? Remember the verb. The pronoun inherent in the verb becomes the subject of the sentence. And if that were in the context of a paragraph somewhere, we would know who he was or is. We would know who they are or you, who that is, because a pronoun has an antecedent. It would have had something earlier in another sentence that would have told us who the he or the she or the you was or the they. Okay? But in this sentence right now, we're just going to translate this as you write. So you write. All right? Now, what are they writing? What are they writing? I'm going to look for a direct object. Words, okay? Words. They're writing words. And again, if this had been logon, as opposed to logus, then it would have been you write a word. Word, singular. You write a word. But now we have us, you write words. Two apostles. Two apostles. Here is our indirect object, ois. Ois. Okay? So if we went back over to our paradigm now and notice, oi, on, ois. Ois is dative plural. Dative plural, see? So I know this is dative plural. Remember we said on datives we're going to use the word two or four. So I want to put the word two there. Or we could easily put four depending on the context. But you write words. Okay, you write words to apostles. To apostles. Okay, to apostles. Now let's take a look at our fourth sentence, which is actually, I believe, number 7 in your book. U lege adelphoi logon anthropo. Now, again, I like to find my verb. Take a moment and see. Where is our verb? Okay, that's right. Lege. Lege is our verb. And that's he, she, or it. Right? He, she, or it is saying. He, she, or it is saying something. Ah, but I have an oo here. Don't forget about oo. What is oo? Oo is our negative. So, in reality, they're not saying something, are they? He, she, or it is saying. No, he, she, or it is not saying. Okay, well, who is not saying? I have to find the subject. Is there a nominative case ending somewhere? As I look down here, as I see a sure enough, here is a nominative case ending. Plural, nominative case, which means it's the subject. So since it's the subject, I've got to work that relationship between the verb and the subject. So brothers or brethren are not saying something. What are they not saying? They're not saying a word. On is my accusative case ending. Okay, means it's the direct object. It's the object of this verb. So, brothers are not saying a word to men. Here is, right here, I can see that that's dative case. That is my indirect object, I-O. It's the indirect object. Now, if I went and looked now at the paradigm on the board, remember, here is that omega with the little iota subscript, that sort of clues me in that this is going to be dative, okay, that omega ending. And so dative case, it means it's the indirect object, it's singular, and so they're not saying a word to a man. I may have said men earlier, but it should be a man, a man. And sometimes, by the way, that's where I see students get tripped up on many occasions, more times than not, on examinations, on quizzes and so forth, having to do with the plurals, because we get excited and we read ahead and we say, oh, I know that word, I know that that's men or man, and we may not be as careful as we should in translating it singular or plural, just like I made the mistake a moment ago. But this is singular, okay? So let's put it all together. All right, brothers then are not saying a word to a man. And I'm going to supply the word to there, as we said earlier, with regard to these indirect objects. All right, let's take a look then at this next one on the board. Genoskamen, genoskamen, hadan, hero. All right, well, genoskamen is my verb. All right, I notice that verb ending, amen. And here's the stem, genosk, which means we know, okay, or we are knowing. So we know, and then what is this? That is my accusative case ending, hada, hadan, which means away, away. All right, I'm going to supply the indefinite article there. It's accusative case. Hero, hero. And what is this? This is the word Hiran, Hiran for temple. Hiran for temple. O is dative case. See that omega with the iota subscript? And it's singular, so it's one temple. It doesn't have an article in front of it, so I'm going to supply the word a. So essentially what we're saying is we know a way, and then I'm going to supply the word to as well, to a temple, to a temple. We know a way to a temple. Now I want to encourage you to do something here before we go on to the next sentences. And what I want you to do is to learn these vocabulary words and learn their stems, because if you don't learn the vocabulary words, then when it comes to a word like hero that you learned as temple or hiran, and then you see a little later on as hero, you'll say, well, what word is that? If you'll learn the vocabulary words and learn those stems, then you're going to be able to read those sentences a lot more effectively, understand those words, and see how they're functioning in a sentence. Okay, let's work some more sentences now. Number 11. In your book, number 11, leges, doulos, notice the comma, Allah, lego, adelphois. All right, now when I have a sentence with a comma in it, I'm going to try to work on one side of that sentence. For example, here is my verb, leges, and that's second person singular, o-ace, a. So you speak, or you are saying, is how we would want to translate that. You are saying, or you are speaking to servants. You are speaking to servants. Here is the indirect object. I'm going to supply the word to, servants or slaves. So you are speaking, all right, you are speaking to servants, but I am speaking, lego, to brothers. Okay, ois, again, is our indirect object. Our indirect object, dative case, ois. So that I say, what we really have here then is a compound sentence, or rather a compound subject. We have two subjects here. You are speaking, okay, here's our first clause. You are speaking to servants, but I am speaking to brothers, Now, one thing I want to call your attention to. Sometimes as you look at these, someone says, well, I thought that the omega was dative. Well, no, this is a verb. First of all, our word leg for saying is a verb. You don't have noun endings on there. And secondly, notice there's no iota subscript. This is simply omega for I say, or I am saying. Okay? All right, let's take a look at number 13. Number 13. Kai, apostolos, kai, anthropos, legamen, lagus, thanatu. All right, again, I'm going to try to find a verb in the sentence, and if I look all the way at the end of this sentence, I see my verb ending. Now let's look at the paradigm to refresh our memory. Here's our paradigm. O, ace, a, amen, ete, usen. These are the present active indicative endings. Okay, present active indicative endings. First person, second person, third person. And then these are the plural, first and second and third. So here it is, amen, we. We are saying words. Now, remember I said that word order isn't as important in Greek? Well, that doesn't mean that word order isn't going to be there. I don't want you to think that all the sentences are all the time going to be all mixed up and jumbled up. They will oftentimes flow along pretty well and read just as we would in English, but sometimes you'll have to make some syntactical corrections or adjustments. But so it will read fairly straightforward. But legomen is we say, what are we saying? Again, accusative case. Let's go to our paradigm. Notice on our paradigm again, os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. There it is, accusative, plural. So words, that's what's being said. Now look back at the sentence. We're saying words, thanatu, thanatu. What is that? U. U is our genitive. Let's look at the paradigm again. Os, u, o, on. There it is. Okay, singular. We are saying, now back, words of death. We are saying words of death. All right, well that's the last part of the sentence, which actually we would translate most likely at the beginning of ours in some ways. But if we look at this sentence, we see that we've got something more. And what is this? Kai and kai. Well, if you'll remember reading through your textbook, that sometimes kai, which means and, when it's coupled with another kai, or when they're used in close connection like that, there's something that is going on that you'll need to pay attention to, a contrast or a comparison or a conjunction of some sort, especially if you have a kai at the beginning of a sentence. Notice here, kai at the beginning of the sentence. So when I have this kai, I'm probably going to see both and. So both, dative case ending, 2 apostles. So both 2 apostles, all right, and 2 men in dative plural, dative case plural endings. So both 2 apostles and 2 men, we are saying words of death. Now when you translate that in English, I usually have my students just translate it just pretty much just like it is in Greek, as long as it makes syntactical sense, in other words, grammatical sense and the ways that words work together and function in the sentence. As long as that makes sense in English, you don't always have to come back and bring this subject all the way back at the beginning of the sentence. But just make it make sense in English, but then keep it in the word order as you find it in Greek as much as possible, so that in this case we can do it. Both to apostles and to men, we say, or we are saying, words of death. All right, let's take a look then at number 15. Number 15, akue, tekna, lagus, oiko, notice the comma, al. Now something's happening here. What happened to our alpha? Here we have an apostrophe, and letters sometimes drop out just like they do in English when they precede a vowel. And here we have a vowel, so that drops out and this apostrophe takes its place. So we just say al, akusen, oxloi, lagus, eremo. Okay, so I want to work on one side of the comma here, work this together. Akue, what's that? O-A-S-A, O-A-S-A, third person singular. He, she, or it is hearing. Okay, who is hearing? Tekna. Tekna is our subject. Now, you say, well, wait a minute. How do I know that's the subject? Because that also is an accusative case ending. All right, that's a good question. Take a look at the paradigm now. If we take a look at our paradigm over here, we're going to notice, sure enough, there it is, ah and ah. This is nominative and this is accusative, and they're plural. So you say, well, how do I know? Well, if we go back to the sentence, we're going to see that I already have an accusative case ending right there. Okay. And that this is probably going to be my subject. Now, in regular sentences, you'll typically have an article that will precede it, and that'll help you also in quickly determining what's the subject and what is the accusative case ending in those instances. But that usually throws people when they're working through, because they say, well, how do I know that this is not my subject? Well, for one thing, it just sort of makes sense that the children are going to be the ones hearing and not the words that are going to be hearing. So sometimes by the context of the sentence, but then also by the process of elimination, I know this is the direct object. I know this is my indirect object because of the dative case ending there. And so I've got to have a subject. Well, another little thing here that sometimes throws people is, why is it that this is third person singular but my subject is plural? And the reason for that is that for some reason this neuter noun, when it, as it is used in the plural here, takes this third person singular verb because it translates it. And the book has a much better explanation. You might look at other grammars and so forth, but don't worry about that. It seems like, well, that doesn't agree. This is a singular and that's a plural, but tekna requires that we translate it that way, and you'll just kind of have to accept that for right now. All right, well, let's continue on reading this sentence. Akue tekna lagus oiko. Now again, children are hearing words, and then we have this dative case ending right here. This dative case ending that I pointed out a moment ago that normally would be translated using the words to or for. Now I want to make a point to you here, okay? Remember I said that when we were talking about case endings and cases, that those 5 cases, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and the vocative, all right, are the only cases in Greek as far as form is concerned. But those cases also perform several different functions, okay? Here is one of those examples where the dative case is not just operating as the indirect object in a strict sense, but rather this is functioning in a locative sense, the locative case, the case of location. And so, and you can just sort of see it by the context that you wouldn't say that they're hearing these words to a house or for a house. That doesn't make sense. You then have to insert the word in. The context would suggest that indeed they're going to hear the words in a house, not to a house or for a house. Again, that just doesn't make any sense. And so the dative is functioning in the locative case here, a case that, again, doesn't have a different form ending, but it does have a different use. And so we're going to translate this as children hear words in a house, singular, right? But, okay, akusin, they hear. Who's they? Here's my nominative case ending, right? Plural. The crowds are crowds. We're just going to say crowds because it's plural. Crowds hear words, okay? And then we go all the way back over here. A remo, dative case singular again, acting here in the locative sense in a desert, okay? So put it all together. Children are hearing words in a house, but crowds are hearing words in a desert. All right, well, let's work through the final sentences in this chapter. Notice now number 17. Let's read it. Doulos, blepses, anthropous, de blepsamen. Now, I don't know if you heard when you read that, if you heard the sigma sound. Remember the sigma sound, the S sound? When we get that sound in there, in those verbs, that's indicating to us future. Remember, the present active indicative endings are o, ace, a, amen, ete, usen. But if we want to speak of that verb in regard to the future, we add the sigma sound to it, and sometimes letters combined, remember? All right, so say, samen, sete, and susen, but when you add a stem before that, a Greek stem that has certain letters, remember we talked about how that this amalgamation takes place? Well, that's what's happening here with this verb. Remember, it's not blepes, okay? It's not blepes. That would be like this, and that would simply be you are seeing, but this is you will see, okay? You will see. All right, what will you see? Well, you will see slaves. Here's the direct object, us. You will see slaves. Now, notice, anthropos de blepsamen. What is this de? De. Well, de is another word for but. Now, here's something important. De is what is known as post-positive. Post-positive. In other words, it will never stand first place in the sentence or in a clause. You won't see de here, but you need to translate it that way in English. You need to put it first. Okay? So, de is post-positive. It's always going to be after a word. It'll never stand first place in a sentence or in a clause, but translated in English as such. So, you will see slaves, but we shall see, blepsamen, we, and then ps, ps, sound for the future, we shall see men. We shall see men, plural. Here's our direct object. Accusative case, plural, right? Okay? So this is future active indicative, first person plural. Future active indicative, first person plural, as we parse that particular verb. All right? Now let's take a look at number 19. Number 19. Eimi, apostolos, al, huioi, este. Okay, what is this? Well, eimi, right here, and este, right here, remember, are our words for the to-be verb. It is a to-be verb. It's sort of like a linking verb. We've talked about that in the past a little bit. And this means I am. I am. Now something is going on here that's a little funny because we have a nominative case ending. I am an apostle. You say, well, why isn't this in the accusative case ending? Here is the rule. The rule is that when we have these to-be verbs, eimi, that the object of this verb essentially must be in the nominative case. It's like putting an equal sign in here, saying, I am. What are you? You're an apostle. Okay? I am an apostle is how you would translate that. I am an apostle. Sort of like a predicate nominative, as some of you are familiar with that. All right? Eimi equals then apostolos, so we'll take that out, and I am an apostle, but you are, and again, think about you are having an equal sign. You are what? You are sons. I am an apostle, but you are sons, is how that would be translated. All right, then sentence number 21. Este, angeloi, kai, ferete, dora, anthropos. Okay? All right, notice, este is our word for you are. You are. You are angels. And just like putting that equal sign in there that we mentioned a moment ago, you are angels and you carry, right? Second person plural, you carry or you bring dora, accusative, okay? You carry gifts to men, dative plural, to men, okay? So you are angels and you carry gifts to men is how that would be translated. Okay, what I'd like for you to do then at this point is to continue working through those sentences before we move to the vocabulary here in just a moment. I'd like for you to work through those even numbered sentences for your homework. But before you move on to that and before we go to talk about that, let's talk a little bit now about the vocabulary for the next section for Chapter 5. I want you to learn those words in the vocabulary, so I want at this point to go over those with you. So let's go over vocabulary. All right, if you'll go ahead at this time and take out your textbook, the textbook that we've been using for the course, and turn to page 35, which is in Chapter 5. Those are the vocabulary words that we want to go over at this time, so that you'll be prepared when you start reading Chapter 5, and when you work through that material, these words will be familiar to you. So what I want to do is what we've done in the past on previous lessons, and that is we'll flash the word up on the screen, and I'll say the word, and then I want you to repeat it out loud, and then notice the definition, and we'll talk about some of those definitions as we go along on some of the words, and maybe give you a memory device to utilize as you work through these words. But then write these down on cards, learn them, but commit them to memory, and then you'll be enjoying Greek a whole lot more with each of those words that you learn. So let's go ahead and go to the first word now, and let's learn these words. Notice our first word. Our first word is aletheia. Aletheia. And that's the word for truth. The word for truth. Aletheia. Okay, let's take a look at the next word. The next word has actually, in your textbook, has the rough breathing mark over it, over the first letter there, the alpha. So remember that'll give it the H sound. And so that word is hamartia. Hamartia. And that's the word for sin. The word for sin. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Basileia. Basileia. And that's the usual word for kingdom. Kingdom. A basilica was a Roman building, a basilica. And so when you think about the Roman authorities, their governmental buildings and so forth, and the reign that they had, maybe that'll help sort of jog your memory when you come to that word, basileia. All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is diakonia. Diakonia. And that's the word for ministry, or service. All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is ecclesia. Ecclesia. And that's the word for church. And of course, our word ecclesiastical comes from that word, ecclesia. And that's the word that you will see quite often in the New Testament that the word church translates. And so when we think about the church of Christ, we're talking about the ecclesia of Christos, of Christ. Okay? All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is exousia. Exousia. And that's the word for authority. The word for authority or right. And that word has reference to the right to rule or govern. The right to rule or govern. And in the King James translation, you will oftentimes see that word being translated by the English word power. Power. When in Matthew 28, Jesus said, all power has been given to me in heaven and on earth. That's the Greek word here that's utilized. And when also in Acts chapter 1, when that word is used, the word power there in reference to the power that God has, and then preceding the coming of the Holy Spirit, exousia is used in that context as well. So the word power or authority. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Epithumia. Epithumia. That's the word for desire or lust. All right, take a look at the next word. This one also is going to have the rough breathing mark that you'll see in your book that's not on the screen, but hemera. Hemera. Get that H sound in there. Hemera. And that's the word for day. The word for day. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Cardia. Cardia. And that's the word for heart. The word for heart. And when someone goes into cardiac arrest, that means that their heart has stopped. You'll hear people talk about that in the medical field. Cardiac arrest, or someone who is a cardiologist is someone who is a heart specialist. All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is martyria. Martyria. That's the word for testimony. And our English word martyr comes from that word. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Oikia. Oikia. That's the word for house. And notice it's a feminine noun, and all of these are feminine nouns. You can tell that by the article, the eta, that's out to the side. That again is telling us that this is a feminine noun. Now also you will see on the lower part of your screen there that this word will be found in the form of oikos. Oikos. It'll have that omicron ending as well, which just means house. So we're going to see it in a couple of different forms. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Parousia. Parousia, which is the word for boldness or confidence. Parousia. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Sophia. Sophia. It's the word for wisdom. The word for wisdom. And our word sophisticated comes from that. Someone who is sophisticated is someone who is supposedly or allegedly wise and knowledgeable of the things of this world. They're sophisticated. They know the proper decor. They know the proper etiquette and so forth. They're sophisticated. Perhaps another word that you might utilize to remember this word is the word philosophy. Philosophy. Remember, phileo has reference to loving something. That's the verb form phileo. And then Sophia is wisdom. So quite literally then, philosophy is the love of wisdom or a study in and a knowledge of wisdom and learning. All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is soteria. Soteria. And that's the word for salvation. Salvation. And sometimes in seminaries and schools of higher learning, people will speak about soteriology, soteriology, and that's just simply a word that means the study of salvation, just like pneumatology is the study of the Holy Spirit, and ecclesiology is the study of church and church organization. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Chara. Chara. Let's say it again now. Chara. That's the word for joy. The word for joy. All right, let's take a look at the next word. All right, the next word is going to have the rough breathing mark over it as well. Hora. Hora. Notice the accent in your textbook is over that omega. Hora. And that's the word for hour. The word for hour. And our word horoscope comes from that word. All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is glossa. Glossa. Notice that guttural, the gamma, glossa. And it's a feminine noun as well. And that's the word for tongue or language. And this is the word, of course, that oftentimes found in the King James translation is translated by the English word tongue. And so when, for example, in Acts 2, on the day of Pentecost, when the apostles were filled with the Holy Spirit, they were baptized in the Holy Spirit, and they stood up and spoke in tongues, well, they were speaking in nothing more than a language of which they had no prior learning in. Some of those languages are identified in Acts chapter 2, those dialects there that were listed in Acts 2. So glossa is a word for language, not a static utterance, but for language. Okay, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is doxa. Doxa. And that's the word for glory. The word for glory. Doxology is simply a word of praise. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to it as a hymn of praise or a word of praise. And doxologies are utilized in many of the epistles. There will be a short doxology praising Jesus as the King, the Lord, the mighty God. There will be various doxologies in Scripture, and it's just simply a word of praise. All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is thalassa. Thalassa. And that's the word for sea. The word for sea, like the Sea of Galilee. All right, let's take a look at the next group of words. Agape. Agape. And that's the word for love. The word for love. Agape. Now, in the New Testament, you're going to find that there are different Greek words that are translated by one English word, love. And those Greek words are agape and phileo are two of those words, and storge, although the negative of storge is found in the New Testament in regard to without natural affection. But agape is one of the highest forms of love, one of the highest forms of love, as best as I've been able to define it and understand it. It's the highest expression of love. It's a love that goes against the inclination, the natural inclination of our emotions, and it's one that is more love not so much of the emotions, but one of the intellect, one of the mind, that calls upon us to do the very best for someone, even for our enemies. Love your enemies, Jesus said. Well, that's the same word in the Sermon on the Mount there, agape, that's utilized in that passage. All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is arche. Arche. Arche is the word for beginning. And our word archaic or archaeology comes from this word, the study of the beginning of things. Arche. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Gay. Gay. That's the word for earth or land. And our English word geology comes from that word. Geology, a study of the earth. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Graphe. Graphe, the word for scripture or writing. Remember we had grapho, which was I write. Well, this is the noun form now. This is the noun form, graphe, which has reference to writing. Okay, we're looking at nouns. Grapho is a verb. I write. This is graphe, writing or scripture. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Diatheke. Diatheke. All right, that's the word for covenant. Covenant, diatheke. In fact, if you'll remember this, that your Greek New Testament is referred to as kaine diatheke, he kaine diatheke, the new covenant, the New Testament. And so you want to try to remember that word, diatheke. And there is another Greek word that oftentimes is translated by the English word covenant, but this word diatheke literally means or has the idea of that the one who's issuing the covenant isn't one who stands to reason about this and say, well, we'll give an exchange here and tell me what you think. It's one who says, here are the terms of the covenant. Now, you can accept it or agree to it, and if you accept or agree to this covenant, then I'll keep my end of the bargain. I'll follow through on my promises, as I've said, and so forth. So there's no bartering over this type of covenant, whereas there are other words that talk about bartering and going back and forth and agreeing and who we're going to decide on a treaty or whatever. This is a one-way covenant, diatheke. All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is didache. Didache. All right, and that's the word for teaching, the noun form for teaching. And notice there also on your screen, the didache actually is a term that has reference to early Christian writing. It's an actual document that was written. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about the didache or the writings of the apostles. So it was an actual document that existed known as the didache. And also this becomes a very important word, didache, in reference to teaching and to a whole theological discussion about teaching and instruction, as opposed to the kerygma, which has reference to what some people say is just the core gospel. But I believe those terms really can be used interchangeably. But didache. Okay, let's take a look at the next word. Dikaiosune. 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 That's the word for righteousness. The word for righteousness. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Eirene. Eirene. That's the word for peace, for peace. Someone has an irenic spirit about them, then they're known as a peaceful person. Or they have a very peaceful personality. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Intale. Intale, that's the word for commandments. Commandments. Intale. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Epistole. Epistole. That's the word for letter. And of course, our word epistle. When we speak of the epistles, that's a transliterated word. It comes right out of the Greek. An epistle is simply nothing more than a letter. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Zoe. Zoe. That's the word for life, and our word zoology comes from that, the study of life. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Kephale. 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 Sometimes I'll forget about where the stress mark is, and I have to go back and look at that. Kephale. That's the word for head, and our word encephalitis comes from that word, and when someone has encephalitis, it has reference to an inflammation of the brain. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Orge. Orge, and that's the word for anger or wrath. Orge. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Parabole. Parabole. And that's the word for parable. As you can see, that's a transliterated word. It comes right out of the Greek New Testament. Each English sound is in its corresponding Greek sound are matched up. Comes right out of the Greek New Testament, out of the Greek language. Parabole. Jesus taught in parables, literally to cast or throw. This is a compound word. It's made up of two words. Para, meaning beside, it's a preposition, and bale or balo, meaning I cast or I throw, so to cast or throw alongside of something. When Jesus taught a parable, he had a difficult concept he was trying to convey to someone, a heavenly concept, and so he told an earthly story, placing it alongside of that heavenly story, and we could understand the easier story, an earthly story, and that helped us to understand a little bit better the spiritual one, the heavenly one. All right, they were laid right alongside of each other. Parabole, parable. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Peritame. Peritame is the word for circumcision. Peritame. And in fact, you can even see, even though it's not listed there, but the preposition peri, the first four letters, peri, means circumference or around. And you can see in circumcision the word circumference there for circle or around. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Proseuche. Proseuche. That's the word for prayer. And there are several Greek words that are used in reference to types of prayers, intercession prayers, supplications. But here is just the Greek word that gets oftentimes translated in a general way, prayer. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Synagoge. Synagoge. And that's the word for synagogue. Synagoge. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Hupomone. All right, it has a rough breathing mark over it, so the H sound, hupomone. And that's the word for endurance, steadfastness, maybe even perseverance, you might add that. Okay, let's take a look at the next word. Phone, or phone. Phone, the word for voice or sound in phonology, a study of sound. Phone. Remember I said the other day a phonograph among the ancient archaic forms of music instruments or playing devices. A phonograph was literally, a phonograph needle was literally a writing with sound. Graphe is a writing, phone is sound, a writing with sound. Okay? All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next word is psyche. Psyche, for soul or life, and our word psychology comes from that word. Psyche. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Mathetes. Mathetes. That's the word for disciple. Now notice to the side of that is the omicron. That's our article, and it would have a rough breathing mark over it, ha, and that's indicating to us that it's a masculine noun. It's a masculine noun, not a feminine noun. We've looked at others that were feminine, but this is a masculine noun. All right, look at the next word. Prophetes. Prophetes. That's the word for prophet. Prophet. Okay, take a look at the next word. Stratiotes. Stratiotes. That's the word for soldier. The word for soldier. Remember that sigma and that tau is a consonant cluster that can begin a word. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Telones. Telones. And that's the word for tax collector. Telones. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Hypocrites. Hypocrites, and that has the rough breathing mark over it as well, though not listed on the screen, but in your book, hypocrites, the word for hypocrite or hypocritical. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Messias. Messias, the word for Messiah. Messiah or messianic. All right, let's take a look at the next word. Neanias. Neanias. Now notice there are two vowels together, but those two vowels don't form a diphthong. They're separated. Neanias. All right, and that's the word for young man. And also the word neos comes from that word, which means new. And that's a different word for new than the one found on the front of your Greek New Testament. That one is, remember, kaine. Kaine, and this one's neos. And we'll talk about the difference between those two perhaps at some other time. All right, let's take a look at the next word. The next one is our article, ha, he, and ta. That's the masculine article, the feminine article, and then the neuter article. And all of those just simply mean the. And in our next lesson, we will talk more about what all that entails. All right, let's take a look at these next group of words. These are prepositions, and the first one here is apa, and that means from or away from or of. All right, so apa. Now, let me just tell you something at this point, that we will be learning a lot more prepositions a little later on. And I want you to go ahead and learn these four here. But we're not going to really talk about prepositions in this chapter, even though Mr. Black mentions them in this chapter and filters a few of them in, and I think that may be good in some way. But on the other hand, I didn't want to inundate you with too many things at this point, learning about prepositions in this chapter. We're going to learn about them when we take them up in the chapter. When we come to sentences with prepositions in them, I'll just skip them for now. But not that they're all that difficult to understand. You may want to work through them now and translate them. But just for now, go ahead and begin to learn them. I think that's good. Put them in your memory and in your your list of vocabulary cards and work with those. But apa means from or away. All right, let's go to the next word. Notice the next word is ace. Ace. Notice the diphthong, epsilon, the iota with a sigma. Ace. And that means into or for or in. Or sometimes unto, like in Acts 2:38, repent and be baptized for the remission of sins, unto the remission of sins. All right, let's take a look at the next word, the next preposition, ek. This is the word out of or from or by. Okay, ek, ek. And sometimes you'll see these words prefixed to another word that'll form one long word, or they'll just be by themselves in a sentence, by themselves. All right, let's take a look at the last word now. This is the very last word, and that's the word in. In. In means within, or simply in, or by, or with, or among, any of those. And you will see it accompanied with the dative. In other words, and I should have explained all this on the other ones, but in, when you see in, it will be followed by a word in the dative case, and you just simply translate it with that preposition and the word to follow. All right, well, that's the end of the vocabulary words. Work on those, and I hope that you'll be practicing those words the very best that you can. So that ends our vocabulary section now. Now, as we bring this session to a close, I want you to notice your homework assignments. I'd like for you to work through the even-numbered sentences in Chapter 4. Remember that we worked through all of the odd sentences in this session. Work through the even-numbered sentences in Chapter 4. I'd like for you to work on the vocabulary in Chapter 5, as well as all the other vocabulary cards to this point. And then I want you to read Chapter 5 and be prepared to think about what we're going to talk about in this next session. So that's your homework assignment. And now, as we bring this session to a close, I want to again thank you for spending time watching this video. And I know that you're learning a lot. I know that I learn a lot each time we go through this, and I hope that you'll continue to stay with us and come back at the next session. I look forward to seeing you then, and until then, I bid you a very pleasant good day.